Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Renee. Yeah, Joey says Renee on her A game today. Agreed. We always appreciate you, Renee. Okay, so hello everyone, welcome to the webinar. So my name's Annette. I am one of the coaches in PDS. I also was a very textbook fearful avoidance. When I started PDS like more than 4 years ago now. So definitely happy to be here with all of you to talk about fearful avoidant attachment style today. Um, and yeah, so obviously I've been a student for a while, and happy to, be coaching and doing these webinars. So Ben's with us today. I'll let him introduce himself as well. And then we'll basically, we'll share some content and hopefully we'll have some time for a little bit of Q&A at the end as well. But I'll hand it over to Ben.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome everyone. Nice to see you. And for anybody who's new, my name is Ben. I am a healing dismissive avoidant with some kind of fearful avoidant wounds sprinkled in there throughout my life. So yeah, predominantly secure right now, but still working at those little edges from time to time. And also I've been in PDS since the beginning, since October of 2019. So I'm proud of that and thankful and happy, and also a certified integrated attachment theory coach. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here today talking about this topic.
Awesome. Yeah, I can't believe how time flies. How long ago 2020 and 2019 were.
Yeah.
Um, okay. So I'll go ahead and share my screen with the slides for today. And I will hand it back over. Let's see. Oops. Okay, I will hand it back over to Ben to kick us off.
Yeah, looks good. So first we'll be talking about the components of the integrated attachment theory. And a lot of you have seen this slide many times, but it's a nice review. And I like to think of these different components. We can even memorize, there's like a little abbreviation, CNEBCB. So core wounds, needs, emotional patterns, boundaries, communication patterns, and behavioral coping mechanisms. And I just remember that CNEBCB. And it's nice to think of, if I'm going through something that's kind of difficult for me or it's kind of unresolved, I'm not sure how to approach it, what kind of skills or areas need attention and support, then I can think of that. It's not an acronym because I guess it's just an abbreviation. I can think of that and think of what areas need attention and where can I show up, or what areas are missing for me. So that's a nice way to approach this. IAT, Integrated Attachment Theory, is a trademarked work that overlaps traditional attachment theory with 6 factors that show up uniquely for each attachment style. So we have the old school attachment theory that started with John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, I think in the 1960s. And, it's a little bit imprecise, but they were onto something very illuminating and very descriptive of human behavior and human experience. And you'll notice we are in the Fearful Avoidant webinar today. And most of us here are fearful avoidant or have some kind of connection to fearful avoidant or the disorganized attachment style. That one was not in the literature and not in the research early on. So it's something that came about later. They started with just anxious and then avoidant, and then over time realized, wow, there's this other part that's a little bit more disorganized, a little bit more complicated. So there's more going on there. So that's a fun fact. That's interesting to me. There's also like current literature within the past couple of decades that's out, and some of them approach this with a little bit more awareness and some of them don't. So that's a thing to look out for. We work towards secure attachment by using results-oriented tools to address each component here. So, excuse me, I'll have to be sipping water throughout the webinar, as I usually do. First, we have core wounds and belief patterns. And this is, what we all understand to be those filters on our experience, and they're emotionally conditioned wounds. And so they're not always rational beliefs. They have evidence behind them. But once we start working on this stuff, a lot of us can realize, or we see that our core wounds will appropriate any evidence that they possibly can to support themselves. And it's more of an emotional state, an emotional conditioned belief than a rationally arrived at belief. And so there's resistance there from inside, because it's how our it's our subconscious comfort zone. It's how we feel comfortable and how we've learned to understand the world and ourselves and interact with it. And so it wants to stay in control. But the answer there for our core wounds is to isolate them. We really identify them, pick them out, and then reprogram them. And that includes emotional reconditioning. You'll hear this phrase so many times in PDS if you haven't already. Emotion plus repetition conditions our subconscious mind. So whether we got a lot of emotion and repetition to give us a wound throughout our lives and our upbringing, now it's the time to give ourselves positive emotion through new repetition of more positive things. Next here, our relationship to needs and expectations. We have needs. That's it's a big area where we want to become familiar and take inventory and really understand what's going on for us. And everything that we do is it's a strategy to meet a need. And our subconscious mind, as Thais says, are needs meeting machines. And so we're always driving towards those goals. And so it benefits us so much to be aware of those things and to get really detailed. And so we can kind of re-strategize, start selecting and practicing new strategies to meet our needs in more effective and healthier ways. And the same thing goes for expectations. Expectations are expectations we have on our own behavior and on other people. We'll be talking about that to a large degree today, excuse me. It's what we assume how things should work and our assumptions around that stuff. And so how should other people behave? What should they do? What should we do in response? All of that stuff. So we want to identify, meet, and communicate our needs and expectations. And something we'll get into is that our expectations can come from insecure places as well. And so they kind of connect back to letter A, the core wounds. If I have a core wound of I can't trust other people and I'm going to be betrayed, then I might have an expectation that my partner always tell me where they are. They keep location services on their electronic devices and they let me have the password to their electronic devices. And so I can check things at any moment. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I think it's a little bit excessive degree of control, but that could be an expectation for us. Or another one is like no lying, but I don't want to give too much away today. So yeah, relationship needs and expectations, good to know and to be able to access and strategize around rather than being kind of unaware. Okay, letter C, emotional patterns. This is just our emotional landscape and what comes up for us day to day, moment to moment. And we want to use tools for emotional regulation. And so we have deeper tools like the emotional processing tool that really get at the root cause there. And then we also have, less deep, I guess more shallow, I don't like to put it that way, but more momentary relief oriented tools like somatic processing and really sitting with our emotions and sort of doing like visualization and breathing techniques and things like that also connects back to nervous system regulation and that whole set of tools. We talked about that last week. So you can check out those webinars if you're interested. But those tools for emotional regulation are to give us some emotional relief in the here and now. And so there might be deeper causes there, stories leading back to core wounds that need to be kind of uprooted and unearthed. But our emotional landscape, it deserves attunement and validation and attention all throughout the days. And having that presence and having that skill set and feeling safe and comfortable and empowered or capable in that realm is something that benefits us. And it also benefits the way that we understand and interact with other people, because we learn that language and then we understand the language that they're speaking to, at least on their emotional level. And it's a deep part of human existence. I will also say that we are motivated, as I said before, by needs. We're also motivated, or our decisions are limited and motivated or provoked even by our emotional feedback. And so even everything I'm saying now and me showing up here right now and waking up this morning, everything I've done has an emotional motivator behind it. It's like I anticipate the satisfaction or the accomplishment or just the necessity of doing all of my routines and everything. And that's how it is for all of us. Okay, moving on here. Relationship to boundaries. This is a big one that's really integral to all of our relationships and even the way that we treat ourselves and the habits that we have in life. I do want to say it connects deeply down to letter F, the behavioral coping mechanisms. And so sometimes we have letter A, core wounds, and the way we deal with those, rather than having healthy boundaries and limitations and being very in tune with our limits and expressing that and enforcing that, we sometimes resort to behavioral coping mechanisms and even like bad communication patterns to kind of like compensate for the absence of boundaries there. And why do we have an absence of boundaries? We have limiting beliefs. And so we want to create healthier strategies there and really practice showing up for ourselves. And that means being in tune with our emotional feedback and identifying what is acceptable to us and what is not acceptable to us in our relationships. And again, I'll repeat, it goes also back to our relationships with ourselves. Like maybe I ruminate about things all day, every day, or maybe I have a really strong, here's a real one for you. I have a strong penchant for sugary foods and things like that. And I really want to have some snacks and stuff. But whether it's ruminating about a problem or excessively deactivating or excessively activating in relation to other people, or engaging in a coping mechanism like eating sugary foods for me, then I might want to institute boundaries for myself and honor those boundaries. And that extends right out to boundaries that I have for other people. So maybe somebody is smoking in my vicinity and I'm slightly allergic. That's another real example. Then I have a boundary. If it's something where we're in a place together, I'll ask, please don't do that. But if I don't have any agency there, then I will remove myself. That is me exercising my boundary. So good example there. We want to reprogram the underlying limiting beliefs that let us or don't let us access boundaries. Maybe we feel like we're not entitled, we're not safe, we're too, I guess, full of ourselves or something to have boundaries, but we want to question that stuff and create healthier strategies. Okay, next, communication patterns. This is kind of a overarching category for all of our modes of communication. And for anybody who's been around PDS or attachment theory for a sufficient period of time, we notice between the attachment styles and even within our attachment styles, we can have vastly different modes of communication and different habits. We have different nervous responses, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. We also have different core wound makeups that create unique interpretations of our experience. And then we notice that we get into communication with somebody else and they have a whole different reality going on there. So that's just something where we want to have healthy communication. We want to know what's going on for us and be able to communicate that in really healthy ways. I think I can't explain that too much because there's a lot of, again, we've done webinars and things about this, like how to script expressing needs, expressing boundaries, approaching a communication. I think we did it like last month or the month before. There's some really rich webinars with like step-by-step processes on how to communicate in a healthy way and in a lot of different scenarios. So that stuff's healthy or helpful, excuse me. But underlying that, sometimes we don't approach those healthy communication patterns and skill sets and tool sets. As Renee said, today Jacqueline is doing like the communication scripts. I think it's just a communication practices group. So that's super helpful, but we have underlying limiting beliefs there again that kind of corral us or motivate us to go in unhealthy patterns. And that's just what we know. It's okay. We've been doing it for decades throughout our lives, but we deserve something a little bit richer, a little bit more effective, and a little bit more respectful and healthy to ourselves and to other people that we're communicating with. So that's available. Okay, and last, behavioral coping mechanisms. That's kind of a catch-all for all the coping mechanisms, which could even include having bad communication patterns, having a bad relationship to boundaries or no boundaries or excessive boundaries when we could be a little bit more detailed and nuanced there. A lot of things. So behavioral coping mechanisms also include like bad habits and compulsive, I don't want to say I guess compulsive behaviors or habitual behaviors. We keep kind of going back to these things, whether it's interpersonal or it's just a personal thing. Like I watch too much TV to get connection with the characters instead of feeling safe making new friends, or I drink too much alcohol to kind of regulate my emotions and to give myself a positive experience when I could have a healthier strategy of really getting in touch with my emotions and doing soothing and regulating work to give myself a deeper level of support that I've never experienced in life, you know. So there's a lot of possibilities there. Coping mechanisms pretty much are determined by, you know, they're determined by needs in our emotional patterns, and then they're also determined by those underlying limiting beliefs that leave us kind of limited in what resources and tools and possibilities we have access to. So we want to reprogram those beliefs again and then create healthier strategies. And so once again, I'll say if you're going through any kind of difficult time and you're kind of confused, you feel uncomfortable and there's some uncertainty there, you can just go through this list and identify, you know, which ones might have something to bear on this situation that I'm going through. And that's a really full way to kind of access these and give yourself what you really need and kind of dispel some of that confusion. Yeah. So good to memorize.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so we'll hop into the content for today, which is unhealthy dating expectations to work through as an FA. So, what are expectations in general? So Ben kind of touched on them as he was going, he was going through those components of IAT. But we can basically think of expectations as programmed ideas about how others should behave, and by which we assume others also operate. Okay, so it's like we think that um, people should be a certain way, and that everyone is like this, right? Everyone sort of just should know this. Okay, these things are usually based or rooted in a couple of different sources. So first, this can often be based on modeling from childhood, as well as modeling that we see in media or movies and just society in general. Okay, so for example, fearful avoidance might associate love with grandiose gestures that they have seen in the movies. So when we see like, the Disney movies and like the prince coming to save the princess and, all these types of things, a lot of times, even though they're cartoons and we might consciously know this is not the way the world operates, a lot of times, especially if we're watching this stuff from a young age, um, you know, this can really imprint us, right? Because it's the stuff that we see around us on a regular basis. And like, Ben said earlier, the repetition plus emotion is really what programs us to begin with. So these programmed ideas come from repetition and emotion, and that can for sure come from just, things like movies and things we see around us. Expectations can also stem from where we feel disempowered in the relationship to self. Okay, so for example, FAs might expect others to be codependent with them if they feel disempowered in their ability to prioritize themselves. So I kind of think of this as like outsourcing. So when we don't feel empowered to get a certain need met, like so in this example, maybe as a fearful avoidant, maybe you don't prioritize yourself, right, as much as you could. And maybe you prioritize other people more than yourself, or self-sacrifice a little bit too much to give to others to, try to earn their love or prove yourself or things like this. What ends up happening is like, those that need to feel prioritized doesn't go away. We just sort of now, because we're not meeting it in the relationship to ourselves, we outsource it because the mind wants to get the need met, right? The mind is a needs meeting machine. So if we are lacking a sense of significance or importance or, feeling prioritized and we're not meeting that need for ourselves, it's going to be natural that we're going to then expect others to meet it for us, right? And so yeah, this is just one example. The last source of some of our expectations can be from strategies that we have adopted to avoid core wounds. So, for example, the FA might have an expectation for unwavering loyalty, and this might be rooted in trying to basically avoid their betrayal wound. So, if we have a wound around, I will be betrayed or I can't trust people, then we sort of are going to naturally hope for other people to not touch that wound. And so it might create this expectation that looks like this. It might look like, well, nobody should ever break my trust, or, people should never ever lie to me in any capacity or be vague or, anything like that, as an attempt to avoid getting triggered, right? But the reality, as we know, especially if you guys have been in here for a while, is like that's an inside job, right? People, can't make us feel a certain way. I mean, obviously there's like certain, considerations and things like that that we would hope for, but at the end of the day, we can't control the outside world, right? So we can't put expectation, but our hope to not be triggered, we can't put that power into the world around us or other people. We have to sort of be able to manage that as internal work that we do to work on our triggers, and no matter what someone does, that wound has sort of been healed internally and doesn't get touched so deeply, right? So that will be the solution to a betrayal wound, rather than the solution being to just expect everyone else to behave a certain way that doesn't touch on the wound, right? So hopefully that makes sense. As we talk about this stuff and, expectations, it's important to note that expectations are not necessarily right or wrong, but when expectations are not questioned and or communicated as needs or desires, this is where it becomes problematic. Okay, so if we have a really high expectation, let's say, so let's just use the middle example here, where maybe we don't prioritize ourselves, and so we expect others to be codependent with us. It's not necessarily inherently in and of itself a bad thing, right? It's not necessarily bad to hope for someone taking you into consideration and meeting your needs, but we have to kind of do two things. One is to question if it's healthy. So, like, is being codependent with someone really the answer? Is that really serving us more than it's hurting us? Kind of questioning that, and then also communicating, right? So maybe we realize, okay, so maybe there's a little bit of codependency going on here. Maybe I'm expecting a little bit too much of this person in terms of making me feel like a priority. Yet at the same time, I do realize that maybe they aren't as available as I would like them to be, and maybe there's a bit of that is internal work on my end, and also communicating a need to them, right? So it's like meeting needs internally to prioritize myself, but maybe I can also communicate to my partner one or two ways that I would like to feel prioritized, right? Like maybe, hey, I really appreciate a good night text, right? Just so I know you're thinking about me. So we can basically, when we can question our expectations to really determine if they're healthy or not and if they're really serving us, and then also communicate the underlying needs, that's when expectations are like transformed from being potentially unhealthy to becoming more of just like needs that we're trying to, get met in a healthy way from other people. So hopefully that all makes sense.
Okay, so here's some common fearful avoidant expectations in dating. If you have any others to add here, please share them. I know it's really it's a rich thing to see what's going on with other people and what the components of their perspectives and stuff. It really gives us a lot of like self-awareness and also awareness of others. So I love that part of PDS. It's one of my favorite things actually. It's sort of like seeing all the variation and getting really familiar with that. Okay, so first, we tend to want complete transparency. So our partner should be faithful in thought, emotion, opinion, action. It's like we have all the same ideas and stuff, and they're also they're always very transparent about everything. And so we know exactly what is going on with them and what it means and what motivated their behavior. And it kind of connects back to trust wounds. Like I can't trust or I'll be betrayed, but we really want somebody. It gives us a lot of certainty that we feel like we need in order to have somebody really transparent and open about all of the details of their motivations and their actions and everything. So that's a big one for us. Next, the romantic partner should be as giving as they are. For example, should be willing to sacrifice and potentially deprioritize other areas of life. This is a really big one for fearful avoidance, especially those, not so much those who are leaning more avoidant, but those who are kind of in the middle or leaning anxious. There's a sense of kind of codependency, and there is that kind of anxious side of we don't really know how to meet all of our own needs. So we sort of take responsibility for each other's needs and for each other's feelings. And especially in terms of giving, there can be like a steady current of people pleasing and over giving and things like that. And we feel like that's what is necessary and what people should do to participate in a relationship. That's what a good partner does, or that's what a good friend does, or a good employee, or whatever. I'll stick to dating context here. That's what a good partner, a dating partner does, is always considers their partner and over gives. We always give extra, or we always show up in a really powerful way all the time with a lot of attunement to what's going on with the other person. And we do this from a place of like codependency. There's kind of a secret hope usually that this is how, well, we understand this is how people should act in relationships. There's like this mutual mind reading and mutual overgiving, but we do that because we also expect it in return. And so sometimes we get resentful when other people don't show up in the same way that we do. So we're very considerate, we're very giving, and then we notice that they don't show up in the same way. And a lot of that stuff has not been talked about usually. It's something that we have as a subconscious expectation or an assumption, but it's not something, again, going back to that very first slide, that we're aware of, and we understand like the nuts and bolts of what's going on, and we're expressive of that to see if somebody else is willing to show up from a conscious place, because otherwise they usually don't understand what we're about, and they don't understand our expectations. And then that resentment that we have later, that kind of comes from out of nowhere, because none of this stuff has been actually divulged and talked about, and there hasn't been a light shown on it at all. So something to consider there. And then also like deprioritizing other areas of life, that comes from that place for fearful avoidance, where we have that avoidance side, but we're also really looking for that deep meaningful connection. And so sometimes we're the type of attachment style to spend all of our time with a partner, at least in the beginning. And there might be more volatility later, or we might feel trapped and controlled and have to deactivate and pull away later. But especially in the beginning of romantic relationships, we feel like, oh wow, this person is amazing, and I feel like this is the person for me. It feels like we've known each other forever, or some kind of variation of this, of excessive intimacy very early on. And then we prioritize that relationship, and then we also expect the other person to do the same to the same degree. And sometimes that doesn't work out. Like, people have jobs, and they have other like family issues and friends, and they have a whole life. And so it's I guess a secure approach is more about increasingly blending our lives in a way that feels very consensual and very balanced and fair and very acceptable by all the parties involved. But sometimes, we're not quite in tune with that, because we really just want that depth of emotional connection. So that's perfectly okay. But we want to be, again, talking about these things and managing the practical aspects of how that plays out, rather than just assuming that this should be the case and then having a lot of wounded reactions when it doesn't happen, or when it doesn't kind of materialize in the same way that we would like or expect, or the same way that we're doing on our side. We usually assume that our partner should always make us feel wanted. For example, always initiating dates or contact. It's like we always want the other person to do more and to show us that we are desired. I think feeling wanted and feeling desired is a big need for fearful avoidance. And it also comes from a place of it's a normal need, that's what we want in relationships, right? But when we have an excessive need to feel wanted that seems like it's not really ever satisfied, then I think that's when we can clue in and see that it comes from more of a wounded place of like, I'm not being made priority, I'm not cared about, I'm not loved or lovable, or something of that sort. I'm not connected, I'm disconnected. And maybe we want overcompensation for that, so we want a lot, but it goes beyond a secure place where we want to feel wanted and desired, and we receive that from our partner, and we're talking about that and how to strategize that and to get that need met. And when we are received and desired by our partner, then we are able to, that lands for us. We are able to receive that and internalize it and feel satisfied from it. One thing I always look for is if we want to feel desired and somebody else actually shows that to us, how does it land for us? If there's a wound there, usually it'll either kind of bounce off, or it like won't translate, or it'll feel really good for a moment and then sort of drain out of the bucket. We have that classic metaphor of like our needs bucket. So we have this need and we need this bucket to be filled, but there's a hole in it. There's a core wound of I'm not wanted. I'm not important. I'm not valuable. I'm not desired. And so we get a really strong dose of somebody's love and affection, and it feels so good. And then in less than an hour or less than a day or something, it drains out completely. And here we are feeling really lonely and wanting again, and like depleted and things like that. And so just a good sign that there's a wound there. Let's see, I'm gonna get up to date with the chat here. Popcorn in my bucket. Yeah, okay, that's good. But should also, yeah, so kind of connected to this. Our partner should always make us feel wanted. Yep. And initiate all this stuff. But they should also always respect our independence and our desire for space. For example, not push too strongly or have too much expectations of us. So that's it's a kind of a catch 22. It's a no-win situation where we really want to feel desired and wanted and feel the passion from somebody and see consistent demonstrations of their care for us and their desire for us and how amazing they think we are. And not even from like a, like a really awful place, manipulative place, but just from a place of woundedness. And also it's a healthy desire in general. But we do want to see that passion and that care and that consideration. But then there comes a time when that feels too invasive and it's too controlling and it's too, I think of like, it's too stifling, like humidity, and it's like too smothering and things like that. And so now it's like, why are you getting my space? Why are you trying to control me? Why are you taking over my life? You see the kind of the snap back or the reaction from that one before as well. Our romantic partner should always be giving as we are, and should be willing to make the relationship the highest priority in life. And then we get what we desire sometimes, and we're like, oh my gosh, why are you so obsessed with me? This makes me feel uncomfortable. And so it's like, please get away, give me some space. I need some independence. And for us as fearful avoidance, when we're unhealed, we're not talking about these things, right? And so it just kind of happens according to this natural progression. And so we really want that connection. And then it feels like it's not there, but then we get it. And then it feels like it's stifling. And then we push them away and we have to deactivate. And then they're left wondering, like, what's going on here? This feels, there's like that inherent push-pull behavior, the hot-cold behavior, that kind of stuff inherent to the fearful avoidant relationship experience. So something to be aware of and start strategizing around and talking about. Dating should be full of fun, passion, and this should last forever. These feelings, yeah, that's totally relatable for a lot of us. I know my fearful avoidant side has wanted that too. It's like things start getting a little bit more boring or more like secure and stable, and then where's the spark? Where's the passion? Where's that exhilaration that I want to feel? And this has been a thing since the beginning of PDS and probably before, where those of us who are fearful avoidance, especially looking at relationship healing and healing our wounds and stuff, we have a kind of like fear or sadness around the possibility that all the excitement in life and in relationships is going to be sapped out. Like I'm going to become this secure person, like a robot, and not feel any of the fun anymore. And so do I really want to go in that direction? And I will say that passion and that fun and that excitement and all of that stuff is still attainable, but it's something that we have the power to engineer, and not something that just happens through the natural insecurity of our relationship. So it's like, instead of I want to say it's more of like a controlled set of explosions or whatever, that we intentionally design, rather than something that we just like we sign up for a really scary ride and we have no idea what's going to happen, and it's going to hurt a lot sometimes, and it's worth it because we just need that sense of excitement. So there's a better way to do it, but that expectation of dating should be full of fun, passion, and it should last forever. That's also, I want to suggest, not realistic. There's things we can do to engineer excitement and enjoyment and all of that stuff, and it's really good to get good at that. And FAs have a unique perspective where, at least from what I've seen, FAs are the best at engineering that stuff, because they desire it so much, from a healthy place. But expecting that every moment should be filled with passion, every conversation should be the best one, every date should be progressively more exciting and more meaningful and more fulfilling and more amazing. That is not realistic, and it's not really sustainable. So it's good to kind of reorient and get in touch with, or get in tune with, I can make this happen if I want, and my partner is going to help me with this, and it's going to be exciting. But there are some times where there's a little bit of a lull, or some dates are less about exciting fireworks and more about like getting to know each other and being regulated and feeling safe and feeling comfortable and things like that, feeling support from each other. So it's nice to diversify our needs and get really in touch with the deeper stuff that's more sustainable for the future. So I also see some comments here. Leah says, it seems like we set up impossible expectations that maybe no one could fulfill. Yep, that's pretty much it for all the insecure attachment styles. We all have our unique expectations. And you can see there's a lot of there's good intentions behind them. They come from needs, and a lot of them can be understood from a really healthy perspective, but they're a bit excessive, and they're not ultimately sustainable or able to be fulfilled concretely, because it's like going back to that bucket thing. We have these expectations based in wounds and needs, and that stuff is not fully resolved, so we can't internalize the good stuff consistently enough. So it's like the buckets always have holes. We're always dumping water in them. We're always filling them up, and it's always draining out. And then we're left wondering, why am I not satisfied once again? And it just happens over and over. Yeah, and it says built-in buffer to prevent getting too close. Absolutely. Yep, that's another thing. Ooh, I didn't mention that at all. So I'm glad you said that, Annette, because that's a good comment. It's like sometimes it's an avoidant tactic, taking a little bit of space or the flaw finding kind of stuff. Shiar says, I like the boring dates with my FAX, just us in our small world, dinner, talks, and cuddles. It was so peaceful. Ooh, yes, I love that. That's good. My DA heart loves the peaceful talk. But yeah, so we bounce around. Sometimes we like the excitement, sometimes we like the calmness. Michelle says, I'm FA leaning AP with pretty sure an FADA. So we both do a bit of this. Yeah, totally. And as you grow together, you'll learn to kind of balance that out. And I would suggest, just as we're going to get into in this webinar, is getting very strategic about fulfilling those different needs for excitement, and then calm and peace and soothing and things like that. You can be very proactive about that stuff and actually structure it into your relationship so it's not so chaotic and wild. Instead, it's something that you are very skilled at. Yeah, and Angela says, yeah, Angela, a more avoidant person like myself, I feel exhausted just listening to those expectations. Yep, it's a high bar. Okay, there's a lot more comments here. I'll let Annette. You can take some or take the next slide, whatever you prefer.
Okay, yeah, no, there was some good stuff in the chat, just like yeah, those are some of the fun ones. Yeah, yeah, you guys can keep sharing. We'll kind of keep going with the slides, but like I'll just share one Katie's comment here, which is like definitely when things aren't super great every time, then I start to worry about why they aren't. And yeah, that goes hand in hand with like that bottom one, right? Like dating should be fun and passionate, and it should just always be like that. Every single date should be like 10 out of 10. Otherwise, like something's wrong. So that's a really common one for sure. Yeah. So okay, so we'll move on here. Thanks for all the shares, you guys. So slower. I feel like actually we're picking up. It was like really quiet earlier in the chat. So yeah, it's starting to pick up steam a little bit. Okay, so here's a slide that just talks about the impact of unhealthy expectations in dating. Because I think sometimes we can like look at those lists, the list of expectations. I'll go back for a second. Like look at these and be like, well, what's so wrong with wanting transparency? Or what's so wrong with like wanting to feel wanted? And the important thing to note, there's a couple things. So one is that we're talking about these things like in extremes, right? Like the complete oh my gosh, transparency all the time, right? 100% of the time. There's, the always wanting your partner to make you feel wanted, right? Always initiating or and the dating lasting forever, right? So we see kind of like the extremes. And it's important to note, so we'll get into it in this slide, that in addition to that, there's also a lot of downsides typically with having some of these expectations and having them in this like all or nothing, framework. So some of the negative effects can include, firstly, not giving the other person the opportunity to meet our actual underlying needs or to see, hear, or understand what's important to us because we're not actually communicating these things. Okay, so like I said on the one of the earlier slides, you know, expectations aren't necessarily bad. Again, we want to check in with like the extreme nature, but like if you have an expectation that your partner, generally speaking, will be, will prioritize you or will take you into consideration, that's not necessarily unhealthy, but what makes it unhealthy is when we don't communicate it because our partner really doesn't even have a chance to show up, right? So if we want to be prioritized by, let's say, again, just a nighttime text or by initiating, having your partner initiate at least, once a week or every other time you guys see each other, it's not necessarily unhealthy, right? You might check in and be like, okay, this isn't too extreme, but maybe you're not communicating it at all. And maybe every week you keep initiating, you're not saying anything about it bothering you, and you're just like expecting the other person to sort of do that mind reading, right? That Ben said. This is where it becomes hairy because it's hurting us and we're not actually giving the other person the opportunity to know us, to get to know that, hey, actually this means a lot to me, this is how I receive love, this is meaningful, and giving them the opportunity to either show up or not, right? So that's really important. When we expect something, it inherently means that we're not communicating generally and we're not sharing our internal world, right? We're just sort of putting this expectation on a person without giving them like the context. So that's really important. Um, and then, secondly, going hand in hand is that we hurt ourselves with expectations that might not be realistic or again are based on that all or nothing thinking, right? So we want to check in with like, okay, am I just wanting my partner to prioritize me, a few times in some specific ways, or am I expecting them to drop all their plans every time I want to hang out with them, right? Because that's where we start to get into this like maybe not so realistic uh, realm, maybe a little extreme. And then what ends up happening is these things are, because they're not realistic, they're, typically not going to be sustainable. And then we just feel hurt, right? But we're not really hurt by the other person, right? It's almost like we're hurting ourselves because our expectations are unattainable. And so, it was like, I think it was Leah's point in the chat, which is like, it's almost like we set these things up that nobody can really ever meet. And sometimes that's true, right? And what happens is that we end up hurt. So it's just really important to look at, okay, are these things realistic? Are they based on like extreme thinking? And that's going to be part of us, not hurting ourselves in this pattern. Okay. And then third here is that another negative effect is that we look to counterproductive methods of coping to soothe the discomfort. So let's say we end up hurting ourselves or we're not feeling good, right? Somebody's not meeting our expectation. We end up uncomfortable. And a lot of times, what do? We might deactivate or push the person away, right? And this actually perpetuates this cycle where we're not communicating, we end up hurt, and then we often use counterproductive coping mechanisms, right? So we continue the cycle by, instead of communicating the issue, pushing the person away, icing them out, testing them, doing protest behaviors, making them jealous, right? Rather than just directly having these conversations with their partner. And this just perpetuates the issue. It, creates frustration for ourselves. It's like these covert contracts of like expecting a partner to do something, they don't do it. we get upset because we've consciously created this contract that they should be, they should be showing up a certain way. And then we end up, coping with things that are just going to continue to deteriorate the relationship. This can lead to resentment, right? We end up with a lot of resentment towards other people. Again, we have these covert contracts that, because literally the other person often just doesn't even have any idea that we are hoping for something from them, they're not showing up, and then we end up being resentful, right? Because we're not getting those needs met. And then similarly related to that, we cling to stories that create disconnection. And this, again, ultimately hurts us more than anything else, right? Because we end up telling ourselves the story that, oh, my partner doesn't even care, right? Oh, they must not care about me. I must not matter to them. Oh, they're not even committed to the relationship. They're going to leave anyway. All because maybe they're not showing up in the way you need. And again, there's like the lack of communication, or maybe a unrealistic expectation, right? So we give it meaning, which is like, it's the suffering on top of all this like pain from the unmet needs. We end up layering on top of it even more hurt and suffering. So really important to check in. If you can think of any other negative effects, I'd love to hear them in the chat. So feel free to share. And yeah, so Elle says, if we want them to show up and they don't, it's rejection, and that hurts. Limiting beliefs, I know. Don't say it. Yes, so I'm gonna say it, but it's related, right, to this last thing. We cling to the story, right? In the story, you can see your story here that, oh, they're rejecting me. And what does that do? That creates disconnection, because suddenly, if you think your partner's rejecting you, what are you gonna want to do? You're gonna want to push them away. You're gonna feel hurt. You're gonna feel disconnected. But hopefully you can see, right? Like, if that it's not necessarily them rejecting you, but it's us, it's our stories that are hurting us, right? It's not necessarily them hurting us, but it's our story of being rejected that's hurting us. And again, this is just as a side note, this is different from, hey, I'm continually, consistently telling my partner and speaking up for my needs, and they're not showing up. It's a different story, right? Because at that point, we're like, okay, maybe this person isn't the right person. If we've been really consistent and clear and following through with our needs, and they're still not showing up, then that's a different story. I still wouldn't say that they're necessarily rejecting you. I would say that, that's a story. And the reality is probably that this person is at a place in their life where they're not capable of showing up, maybe for as much emotional bandwidth as we're hoping for. But anyways, that's a different story than what we're talking about today, which is just like the unspoken expectations. Okay. So yeah, so of course I'm rejected. Yeah, so for sure. Elle says I won't find another, always be rejected or abandoned, etc. Yeah, so for sure you can see that there's a lot of stories that come out of not getting our needs met, but a lot of times it's the underlying thing is that we're maybe not communicating them so clearly, right? Or they're not quite realistic. So yeah, good share. I guess we'll move on, unless, let's see if we see anything interesting. Okay, well, I'll go to the next slide here unless you see anything else, Ben.
No, lots of good discussion and sharing.
Yeah.
See people kind of share and support each other. So that's very, very needed these days. Okay. What can we do instead? So we want to check in with some different areas here, and we'll go through these in detail in the following slides. So if this goes too fast for you, we'll break it down. So don't worry. First, are my expectations realistic? So it's good to kind of take inventory and kind of expand our consciousness or our awareness and look at my expectations and ask, is this really realistic? Is this what other people would expect, or other people in a similar situation? Or especially, I think more than anyone, or more than anything, would a secure person expect this? And sometimes we don't know the answers to that. And the content that we have to kind of fill in those questions is all from our insecure perspectives, and we don't have a lot of good information. And so that's okay, but we do kind of want to just loosen our perspective up for a little bit more nuance and a little bit more open possibilities. So it's worth doing. But a good question here to get very precise is, how might my expectations be hurting me or hurting my relationship more than helping? And so that's where we're going in that direction of like the costs versus the benefits of the expectations that I had. So it's like, and it's not a pros and cons things exactly, excuse me. It's not a pros and cons list. It's what are the costs of my expectations versus what are the benefits of maybe having a different expectation in this scenario. And again, from a place of insecurity where we don't have the content to fill in like healthier possibilities, this might be a difficult question because it's like, I can see it in some of the chat and some of the experiences that we're having like dating recently. It's like, I should, I have this expectation that this person gets back to me with clarity and with promptness. And then what if my expectation is unrealistic? And then the realistic explanation is that, oh, I should just be okay with not putting my needs out there and not expressing myself and not desiring that. And I'm too needy and I'm too much of a burden and stuff like that. And you can see where our range of possibilities here is caught in just insecure interpretations, and so all of those are bad stories. And so it's like I have an expectation, maybe a healthy version is I have an expectation that my partner or the person I'm dating show up consistently and respond in a fairly timely manner, and they can communicate when they don't show up and they can't get back to me soon, or they'll give me reasonable explanations. And it's not something that happens all the time where they're always waiting 24 hours. And then I asked them what happened, and they said, oh, I got really busy, or I had a medical issue, or I just, work is really bogging me down. And like, that's okay once or twice, right? Because life happens, it really does. But is this happening all the time over and over to the point where they're just not checking their messages and things like that? And do I need to say something a little bit more precise and more like provocative in the sense of like, hey, I have an expectation that, to get things off the ground in dating, we'll have timely interaction back and forth. And that's how we kind of gain momentum. And that's just what I assume to be necessary for me and the people that I date. And is that something that you can do? And then we get to see, are they able to do that or no? And sometimes the answer is yes, but in action it's no, or sometimes it's just no, or sometimes they again won't get back to us on that. And so it's like we get to find out there. So good to ask, how might my expectations be hurting me or my relationship? And what would benefit, or what benefits would I get through having different expectations there? Number 2, or letter B, what needs might I be trying to get met by holding my partner to this expectation? How might I get this met in other forms? So sometimes we really are holding our partners to expectations or holding ourselves to our expectations because we have unmet needs there. And it kind of goes back to that example in one of the previous slides where it's like, I really want my partner to show up really strongly and desire me and make me feel wanted all the time. Or I want our dates to be exciting every single time, and every single time has to be the most exciting date that we've had yet. And it just keeps building and building and building, and all of that stuff. But what needs am I trying to get met through those expectations? Maybe I do need a sense of like being deeply known and understood and cared for and accepted. And maybe I do need a level of excitement and intensity and things like that. And what does that mean for me? Maybe significance, or just it meets growth or new experience, novelty, things like that. So there's different possibilities there on those human needs. Yeah, so it's good to check in there. Try to break down our experiences and our expectations to what are the constituent needs that are motivating all of this for me. Letter C, where do I feel disempowerment to meet these needs in the relationship to myself? How can I empower myself? Excuse me. This is a great one. Turning it inward and seeing, I think this is a big, for most of us insecurely attached people, with whatever attachment style that we have, when we have maybe unrealistic expectations for our partners or for ourselves or for our relationships, there is almost certainly always a sense of disempowerment with regard to some of our needs internally. And so it's like these needs are not part of our lifestyle. They're not integrated well. They're not known. and understood deeply and targeted through the understanding of our own experience and like even our emotional feedback in response to the things that we go through day to day. All of that stuff is absent, or it's sort of halfway there. It's not fully developed, that sense of like a healthy parent, a healthily parented self or a reparented self is not always there. So my need for excitement, my need for significance, my need for acceptance, my need for closeness and quality time and depth of connection, and also my opposite need for freedom and independence and space and autonomy and all of that stuff, those are not really well met internally, and I don't have strategies in my life to meet those. And I also often have wounds, which mean that even if I am trying to meet those, it's not really taking effect. It's not really sinking in because my wounds are like the holes in the buckets again, always draining out that satisfaction and leaving me feeling empty again and unsatisfied. And I'm too controlled, I'm too trapped, I'm too stifled or smothered. And at the same time, I'm not valued enough. I'm not close enough to other people. I don't feel wanted and desired, and I don't feel the spark of our connection quite enough. And so it's like those things, they start internally, and usually in a healthy place or a secure place. Our parents kind of gave that to us and modeled it to us over time. So we sort of carried the torch, or they passed the torch of those things to us, and we carry it with us. But from insecurely attached conditioning, we didn't get all of that. And so we want to figure out, where do I feel disempowered and what can I do there? How can I empower myself in new ways? And I mentioned this briefly before, but letter D, what core wounds am I trying to avoid within myself by holding my partner to this expectation? Ooh, this is such a good one. So do reprogramming work around these? I'll mention a big one that I haven't talked about as much, but the trust wound. I need my partner to be always transparent. I need to know where they are and who they're with and what the details are regarding all of that stuff. And I have a little bit of a excessive desire for control over who they talk to and when and all of these things. And you know, we run it through the different steps. Is that expectation realistic? It's a bit iffy. It's a little bit controlling. What needs am I trying to get? Certainty, safety, comfort. Where do I feel disempowered? Probably haven't. If you go into, what is the course called? I'm going to forget it. Overcoming betrayal, I think. If you get into that, then there's where do I feel disempowered in relation to myself in the area of trust? Usually there is like an unhealthy internal trust baseline. That's the kind of phrase we use. It's like even the way that we treat ourselves and the way that we show up for our own trust wounds and our excessive needs there for loyalty and reliability and certainty and safety and trustworthiness and all of that stuff. That's kind of fractured and it's not fully developed. So we are kind of flying by the seat of our pants. That's a weird expression, but like we're flying, or we're going through life in a very insecure state, needing this kind of trustworthiness and safety, and yet we don't even give it to ourselves. So that's letter C. But then letter D, what core wounds am I trying to avoid? That's obvious. I will be betrayed. I am betrayed. I cannot trust others. Others are not safe. These kinds of things. And even sometimes I can't trust myself. I am out of control. My behaviors or my feelings are unsafe. All of this stuff kind of goes into our unique package of trust wounds for as a fearful avoidant. So what core wounds am I trying to avoid? By making my partner or expecting my partner to always divulge where they are and who they're with and what they're doing. And I think some of that stuff is really nice and considerate, actually, like, oh, I'm going out with some friends from work after work, and the people that are going to be there are Toby and John and Sarah and Nima and all of these people. And it's just like there's a little bit of consideration there, which is totally normal, and that can actually be really supportive and helpful or healthy. But if I want excessive control over that situation and excessive amounts of information, then I'm avoiding that core wound of I can't trust. And usually that comes from a place of like deep woundedness, where the feelings, the emotions that we feel around that wound are really, really strong, and they're hard for us to approach because they're so impactful and they're so scary. And so that's something to have a lot of compassionate consideration for ourselves. But sometimes, again, we're projecting or we're putting that expectation on other people because I can't approach that wound for myself because it is too sensitive, at least at this point in time. So that's it's very simple. It says do reprogramming will work around these, and that's a little simplistic, but it's like that's actually what we need. We want to go in that direction and start to feel those emotions. I'm thinking of the emotional processing tool. Feel the emotions. What are the stories there? Are those true? What kind of positive evidence can I give myself? What kind of needs do I have here that I need to show up for right now? And all of that stuff. Okay, in a bonus, where do you place extremely high expectations on yourself? That gets into shadow work. I think that's another thing where I've seen it kind of in the chat. It's an interesting thing looking at your fearful avoidant experience in the chat and all the shares there. It's like we have the issues and the core wounds around other people, but for us as FAs, it also goes back to us, to our own identity and our own wounds of being too much, being a burden, being entitled, not being enough, not showing up for others enough, or all of these different things. So the wounds, like our dating experience kind of bounces around between these different wounds. There are a lot of facets that relate to different parts of that whole experience. And so going internally, do I have high expectations on myself in terms of not sharing my needs, not sharing my healthy expectations in relationships, not sharing the fact that, hey, I want to receive regular communication and I don't want to be left on red for 24 hours or 48 hours or something like that. And then being given these kind of like intermittent excuses of like, oh, I got busy or something happened, or some of that's okay. Again, life happens, but am I expressing myself in a way that is actually honoring to my own boundaries, my own standards? And then that high expectation of I'm going to play small, I'm going to be invisible, I can't share this stuff because it's too needy and too desperate. When really, yeah, there's people out there that will shame us for our needs and our feelings and things like that. And it's just good to know those people are unhealed avoidant people, fearful avoidance, dismissive avoidance, or whoever. Those are people who have their own stories and their own way of approaching this stuff. And so we deserve to be our secure selves and then start to connect with the people that actually love that stuff instead of the people who are avoidant again, and make us feel like we need to crawl back into our core wound hole of I'm a burden, I'm too much, I should be small, I'm too entitled, all of that kind of stuff. Okay, off my soapbox. Yeah.
Okay. So did you do the bonus, Ben? Did I totally miss that? I might have been in the chat.
Yeah, I did. I don't know if I did a really targeted job, so you're welcome to
It's
explain
no,
more.
it's okay. I think I just got like sucked into reading the chat. So apologize for it. So we'll move on. So all right, so we are gonna go through like a little bit of okay, this is like a really wordy slide. Sorry guys. We'll go through like the tools for each of these. Like so Ben really kind of did awesome like outlining like the importance of each one and kind of like generally what to do. And so these are going to be like the tools for each. Okay. So first one is question expectations. Are my expectations realistic? How might they be hurting me or my dating experience more than helping? Okay. So these are going to be the two like tools that you can use to assess this, right? Because you might be like, well, how do I know? I don't know. um, so first you can question, right? We want to question the story. So if you notice yourself getting triggered by an expectation not being met, so this is on the left side here, you can ask yourself, is it realistic to expect XYZ from this person? And is this 100% true at all times? Okay. So like, for example, there's a little example bubble on the left. Is it realistic to expect our date to never find someone else attractive? Does this 100% of the time mean that they're going to cheat on us, right? Like, what is the fear underneath? So, like, so basically, you're asking yourself, like, is this expectation realistic to expect all the time? And then you can uncover the meaning that you give to the expectation not being met and question that story. Okay, so like for example, if you notice that you are expecting your date to never find someone else attractive, or you get, really triggered by the fact that your date maybe looks at someone, the opposite sex or same sex, whatever it might be, does that really 100% mean that this person will betray you, right? You can question, like, what's the meaning you give? Maybe the meaning is that, like, they're gonna betray you at some point. Is that really true? So this is basically like emotional processing tool stuff we're doing here, right? But like doing it from the perspective of, is the expectation realistic 100% of the time? And what's the fear underneath? And is that fear really true, right? Is that fear really something that will happen, right? Or is it just a story? Is it just something that is a solvable problem, right? Okay, so I'm just going to disable the annotation because I noticed someone's trying to draw on the screen. Okay, so so we're questioning the stories, okay? We're questioning the expectation and we're questioning the meaning that we give to the expectation not getting met, okay? And then we want to find evidence to oppose that. So consciously feeding the opposite by finding some evidence. Okay, after we do that, so you can look at, okay, what are all the ways that this person shows me that they are loyal and they are showing up? And, what are some reasons why it might be okay to occasionally glance at a person and find someone attractive, and that not necessarily lead to a betrayal? Have I ever done that? Have I ever like looked at someone and been like, oh, that person's cute, and yet had no intention of cheating on my partner, right? So you can sort of dig into some of this stuff and find evidence to balance. And then underneath is going to probably be some needs. So you can identify what are the underlying needs and create strategies to get the needs met. So, for example, you might communicate your need for trust and consideration, and you might vet partners accordingly. So, if you're in a situation where your date is like constantly looking at other people and just not even present, and or making comments about how, attractive someone's butt is, like things like this that maybe are crossing the line, that might be an opportunity to say, okay, like I'm going to vet this person, and actually this is cross that line for me, right? So, and you can communicate, hey, like it's really important to me to like be present during our dates, right? So instead of, having the expectation without giving the chance for the person to show up, you want to communicate these things, right? And vet accordingly. So that's sort of one piece. And then the other piece of this, like questioning the expectations part, is to look at the costs and the benefits. So you want to look at what are the costs. So let's say you're a place where you're like, okay, all right, maybe this expectation isn't 100% realistic, and maybe you're like warming up to that, but you're still kind of having a tough time letting it go. You can look at the second part. What are the costs of holding on to this expectation? And what might be the benefits of kind of being, a little bit more flexible, less rigid, and or communicating your needs more vulnerably rather than holding on to the expectation. So for example, at the bottom here, the costs might be that, well, we end up deactivating, we end up pushing people away and giving up on someone, who might otherwise be showing up well, right? Maybe your date looks at, an attractive person once during the date, and maybe you're like, oh, that's it, I'm done, I'm out of here. And maybe otherwise that person, maybe if you had communicated, that person would have been like, oh yeah, I'm so sorry, like, and maybe they can be more present, or maybe they were looking at something else. You thought they were looking at a person, right? So the cost of like having that really rigid expectation might be that we end up losing opportunities with people who otherwise are really good people. And maybe the benefit of embracing a little more flexibility is that we open ourselves to potentially good partners, and we actually foster our own growth in the process, right? By questioning our stories, practicing communicating, and like building those skills for ourselves as well. Okay, so this is the first piece, the questioning expectations. These are the tools for that.
Okay, next here, meeting our needs, really important component here. So what needs might I be trying to get met by holding my partner to this expectation? We want to question that. Excuse me. And where do I feel disempowered to meet these needs in the relationship to myself? So this is where we do want to go in the direction, or we can go in the direction of really rebuilding our sense of empowerment and self-attunement here. It's like we've always needed this kind of reparented support, and we really want to have that in our tool set or in our comfort zone as part of our lifestyle. So that kind of balances out, and it balances out our dating experience, and it means that our dating experience doesn't really require excessive unhealthy or unrealistic expectations. Instead, we bring realistic expectations there because we are doing some stuff to take care of ourselves, not putting it all on the other person. So we want to first define our needs kind of in detail. For example, I want to feel wanted. I want to feel valued. I want to feel important. You can see there's that significance need there. And then brainstorm, what are healthy strategies to meet this need from others? For example, vulnerably request presence from somebody, from a friend or a family member, or even your partner. Availability and seeing needs through. So we're doing that. We're seeing the needs through. We're requesting availability, or we're showing up there, and we're doing that on a consistent basis. And so it's like it's really hitting, and we're internalizing that this is available to us. It feels satisfying, and sometimes we are learning to feel satisfied through that rather than just through our partner. But that's normal, but it will take effect after some time. And then last, create habits and rituals that empower you to meet your needs on your own. So again, we want that consistency. We want to have it be habitual. So it's scheduled into our lifestyle and our routines and all of that stuff. Because otherwise, honestly, I want to say, like, I can't tell you how many times I have come upon a need for myself that I really needed, and it was so impactful. And even the realization was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I've been ignoring this whole time. And I can meet this need, and I could have my partner meet this need, or I could have my friends meet this need, or something like that. And yet, I just noticed it that one time and thought about it for a few minutes, and it was really powerful, but I didn't write it down. I didn't make it a habit. I didn't do any of that stuff. And so I wasn't actually actively getting that need met in a regular way. And what happens? It's outside of our subconscious comfort zone. So that eureka moment, that aha moment, that realization, it's so beautiful in the moment, but it just gets forgotten in time, and we get back into our old routines. And then here we are again, 3 months later, 6 months later, feeling like, wow, this need is not getting met at all. And I'm expecting this from my partner or from my friends or whoever. I guess we're just talking about dating today again. So I'm just expecting this. I'm laying this on them, and feeling resentful that they don't fulfill this. But I never actually engineered that as a habit, even in meeting my own needs or finding other avenues to meet my needs. So be specific and follow through. We want to have a high degree of specificity, because that's part of self-attunement. What are my needs in detail, and what are the strategies to get them met in a very satisfying way in detail, right? And then, did I notice this one time and I made an amazing effort and it felt so good, and then I just let it go after that? Is that gonna keep us satisfied over time? The answer is no. It's like we're gonna be parched again. I love all the hydration talk in the chat there, and that's a good metaphor. It's like we found the well, we drank, we got totally full of water, and then 2 days later, we're like, oh my gosh, why do I feel so miserable and drained and lethargic, and I have a headache and all of that stuff? It's because we weren't being consistent. So we need that. So yeah, with whom, what needs, where, when, and why, all of those details, really kind of connecting the details of those needs and the consistency to our inner experience, knowing ourselves deeply, writing that out, and journaling, getting to know ourselves. Like what I guess I don't have time to explain it more, but it's like I would go into the needs course and do the inventories, do the relationship needs inventories. It breaks it down a lot. It's not exhaustive, but it's a higher degree of detail than I've seen anywhere else. And so getting really specific on our needs is so good. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I see Ramona's question in here, which is how does that work for wanting to feel desired or wanted? Can't really picture what that would look like when trying to fulfill that for ourselves. So it's a really good question. This is like a common one. Like, what about things like, like even physical affection can be tough, but I would look at like two things. So first, something like this, like what you're asking, I what helps me is like, what does that look like coming from someone else? So if you have a partner, what would it look like to feel desired or wanted? And like, can you do those things like on your own? So for example, maybe it's like your partner feeling really present, right? Or being really present and available for you. Well, how much time out of your day do you carve out to like sit and be present with yourself or like be present with your thoughts and journal, something like that. Or like maybe you want your partner to initiate making plans. Well, how often do you like make fun plans for yourself, just for you, right? Like, or carve out time for yourself to do something that you really enjoy. So that kind of, I don't know, I find that that's helpful for me, to sort of look at what does it look like coming from someone else and how can I like, transform that. The other thing you can do, although this one you've gotten to like kind of the root need, which is like feel desired or wanted. This question comes up a lot with like physical affection. And with something like that, you can always question, well, what's underneath the physical affection? You can solve for it at the superficial level, which is like, okay, maybe you wear comfy clothes and you get that physical sense of comfort. But you can also look at what does physical affection give you other than just the physical comfort? Well, it probably gives you a sense of like safety or reassurance. And so trying to get those needs met as well can be helpful. So I wanted to just like touch on that because I know sometimes it can be tricky to figure out how to meet the needs on our own. Um, like Ben said, the needs course, the advanced needs course also has like a Google Doc, I think, in there still, where people like it's like a crowdsourced document of how to get, it's like ideas for how to get different needs met. So you can take a look at that as well.
Do you
Um,
mind if I add something to that?
yeah, yeah, go ahead.
Two things, and I think we'll get into
Mhm.
this a little bit in the next slides, even though we're getting close to the I think we're in the last few
Mhm.
slides here. So Ramona,
Mhm.
two other things that I'll add is this kind of goes for all of us, and this is an interesting thing that I run into in like the coaching and something I've seen in PDS and something that I experienced as well is like meeting your own needs takes a reassociation of your needs to your own power and to your own agency. And so it's like often we can't meet our needs. So we're either avoidant and we sort of we cope through like creature comforts like media and hobbies and work and things like that, or we're anxious and we meet all our needs through other people. For most of us who have insecure attachment style, there needs to be a reassociation of our needs to our own agency and to ourselves. So literally, as you're practicing this, I think most people experience like resistance, like, wow, this isn't landing. How am I going to meet my own needs for physical comfort? And as Annette said, you can kind of break those down into the deeper needs. But even as we give ourselves physical comfort, like self massage, like going to the spa, or like getting nice lotion, or wrapping ourselves in a comfy like towel or a sweatshirt or something like that, all of these things are, yeah, there's so much there. There's so many possibilities. It is it is part of the process to be able to receive that and internalize that and to make it feel satisfying when it's just coming from ourselves. And a lot of people have resistance to that. And then the other thing that I will say is that sometimes there's core wounds there that also give us this resistance. And so like let me scroll up here to find your comment here. Desired, wanted. I don't know if I got all of it. Feeling connected, desired, wanted, all of those things. Physical connection. I don't know if that was part of it. But sometimes it's like, oh yeah, how does that work for wanting to feel desired and wanted? Can't really picture what would look like when trying to fulfill that for ourselves. So yeah, do things in all the different areas, get very specific as we've repeated so many times, get very specific in the needs. And then there's that process of being able to internalize that and feel satisfied from our own selves and rather just from other people or just external coping mechanisms, but then also target the core wounds that say, I am not wanted, I'm not important, I'm not desired, I'm unlovable, I'm disliked, I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough to earn this stuff. That's a weird system to get into. We don't want to earn it at all. We want to just feel like we are worthy. and that we are good enough for what we want. And so those core wounds can also, just like Leah's comment above with the hole in the bucket, can drain the bucket even when we're doing so well at instituting a habit of meeting our own needs and trying to rebuild that relationship to ourselves, that one of like nourishment and support and soothing and care and empowerment and all of that stuff and self-belief. The core wounds can drain that out, so they need to be addressed as well. So that's all I wanted to add there. I hope that's helpful. And I
Yes.
think that applies to some of the other questions here. I saw some other ones, but I can't find them now. Yeah.
Yeah, I see. Like Q asked, like, I need to feel seen and heard. How can I meet that for myself? So there's like a bunch of comments on that as well. But yeah, like, yeah. So hopefully this helps because it's really it can really be applied to like any need. Sometimes we just have to do a little bit of like creative thinking on it. Um, okay. So yeah. So let's move on. So this is D, which I think we're on the second to last slide. So okay, the core wounds piece. What core wounds am I trying to avoid within myself by holding my partner to this expectation? So, for example, wanting a partner to sacrifice other areas of life to avoid an abandonment wound, right? Your abandonment wound. So, you basically maybe want them to sacrifice their hobbies, their friends, their career to give you attention because you don't want to feel abandoned, right? You don't want that wound to be triggered. So, super important to reprogram those core wounds, right? So you want to look at, so the first thing is, okay, what wounds are getting triggered for me? So if my partner doesn't meet this expectation, what do I make that mean, right? So it's similar to like the emotional processing tool we did, but this is the auto suggestion is more of like a daily repetitive thing that we do for like 21 days. So it's kind of like in the background. It's like a slower burn, but it's really effective for reprogramming deeper wounds. Like if you really see them showing up consistently, like that abandonment wound, maybe you notice it coming up all the time, even in other areas of life. You want to do the auto suggestion to really pluck it out. So um, you want to the steps for auto suggestion are, and this is in the emotional processing, sorry, the emotional mastery course for anyone interested. First, you want to get into a relaxed state where you're in alpha or theta brainwaves, okay? Because these are like our suggestible brainwave states where we absorb things and they tend to sink more deeply into like the subconscious. So what does this mean? This is usually the first hour when you wake up or your last hour before you go to bed when you're sort of like in this like half sleepy state. And it can also be like after a meditation or after intense exercise. Um, you want to pick one or two core beliefs that affect you the most. So maybe again, you notice the abandonment wound comes up a lot and you notice a lot of your expectations stem from that. Maybe you get really triggered when that comes up for you. So start with that one. And you want to look through all areas of life to find evidence that opposes this belief or this core wound. Okay. And you want to use a positive reframe. So instead of saying, I will not be abandoned, you want to say something like, I will maintain connection, or I am connected to my partner. I have people in my life who are loyal to me, and things like this. So you want to find each day 10 to 15 pieces of evidence to oppose your wound, right? So ways you're connected, ways like people in your life are loyal to you, ways you can maintain connection over time, people, things like this. And it's really important for each piece of evidence, we want to get specific because we want to really pull up imagery and emotion to speak to the subconscious. So this means like instead of saying something like, yeah, I have some good connections at work, you want to say something like, I'm connected because my coworker the other day made this really nice comment about how much they value me as a coworker and how they're like so happy to like be working with me.
Mm.
That's going to bring up a lot of emotion and visuals than just saying something generic, right? Saying like, oh, my coworkers like me, I know that. So the really getting specific, really pulling up specific examples, specific memories if you can for each piece of evidence or as many as you can. Anything that's going to elicit emotion rather than being more of like an intellectualized thing. And then you want to continue this for 21 days, okay? And the 7 areas of life, by the way, are in this little box at the right. So you can look in again, like maybe it's with coworkers, maybe it's in other areas of life, right? Spiritual, financial, physical, mental, emotional relationships are really just one area of life. So this is like for again these wounds that come up that are like really pervasive and and hit deep for us when they're triggered. Okay. So we do the 21 days, 10 to 15 pieces of evidence a day, and really getting specific to pull up the emotion. Because again, like Ben said earlier, repetition and emotion is what's going to shift these beliefs. So really important exercise for, yeah, for this.
Okay. Lastly, expectations on self. This is sort of a bonus. You don't have to go this far. I think if you do everything up to this point, then you will be well taken care of and you will have got at a lot of the root of the issues there. So huge a level of support. But this is kind of a bonus thing. Ask yourself, where do you place extremely high expectations on yourself? So ask yourself, where do I hold myself to expectations that create pressure or distress or hurt me more than serve me? So that's that kind of stuff where it's like we have, possibly core wounds of like, I'll be a burden. I'm a bad person. I'm bad. I am too much. I am not enough, like all of these different things. Like I have to earn somebody's affection, but also me expressing my needs and my boundaries. That's being a burden, or that's being like a bad person, being entitled, things like that. I guess I've encountered a lot of these. There's so many different variations here. So just figure out what it is for yourself. But where do I hold myself to expectations that create pressure? Again, being in tune with our feelings, our emotions, distress, or hurt me. I can see the consequences playing out and it like doesn't feel good. A good way to kind of evaluate this, if you're not really sure of like what are good in I guess healthy or unhealthy standards or what's reasonable, like you don't have a sense of like self-trust around this, is like, how does this feel? And that might not give you the whole truth of the situation, but you do know that the way it feels means that there is unresolved stuff. And so it's likely that the way things are right now is not completely sustainable. So I'm thinking of some of those examples where we're dating people, they're not following up with us regularly. They're making promises or claims, and then they're not following through with that stuff, or they're being intermittent with us, kind of avoidant, or they have some excuses that are reasonable because life happens, and other times it feels like it's a lot, like they're dropping the ball over and over and over. Is this a problem with me? Is it a problem with them? What's going on here? We can at least know that there's something unsustainable for the continuation of this connection, because it feels so bad and that is not resolved yet. And so that needs attention. So get specific. Where do I hold myself to expectations? And then, are these realistic expectations to put on yourself? This can be such a freeing kind of question, because then we sort of realize like, wow, I don't hold these expectations to other people as much, but I hold myself to unreasonably high standards. And look how it hurts me. Look how it makes me feel. Look how I judge myself or I scold myself. I can think of like clients, telling me how like they're like, I hate to see this. But I love to see it, because then I go right after it. But it's like clients who say like, I'm so stupid, or that was so stupid, or I'm so pathetic, or I shouldn't feel this way, or I shouldn't be acting this way. All of this kind of shame and guilt and stuff like that. We do things because we have reasons to do them, even if it's not the most healthy action. And sometimes we really want to curtail or provide other strategies to meet our needs, because sometimes we act in ways that come with severe negative consequences. That happens, right? But that way of treating ourselves, I think, leads us there. My expectations of, I always have to be perfect, I always have to be doing enough, I always have to be doing too much, I always have to make sure that I'm not doing too much, I always have to make sure that I'm not a burden, that I'm not too much of a responsibility, that I'm not too large of a task for somebody else to interact with. Like I have so many feelings and so many needs, and I'm so needy and desperate and all of that stuff. Those are not ways, those are not healthy ways to really treat ourselves and to interpret our own behavior and to relate to ourselves emotionally as well. That shame and that guilt, we deserve better than that. Okay, so yeah, what are these real unrealistic, excuse me, are these realistic expectations to put on myself according to my situation and my lifestyle right now? That I love that phrase that you included in it because it kind of alludes to in my mind um we are here in PDS. We're doing other things. Some of us have therapists. Some of us are doing like somatic work. There's a lot of options here. We are making progress. We're making earnest efforts, but we deserve to accept ourselves where we are now. And like it's okay to not be perfect and it's okay to be learning. And I would say the acceptance of our imperfection, like fully accepting that we are okay where we are and this is where we have like there's no other person that I could be right now in this moment, and there's no other place to start to work on this stuff other than where I am right now. That puts us in a frame where it's like, it's okay to learn. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to feel these things out and to have these skills develop slowly over time. And it's okay for this is a big one for me as a very avoidant, like a healing avoidant person. It's okay for other people to see us go through this and experience us as we go through this. And so all of that stuff's okay. Are my expectations really realistic? And then also, and then kind of part of this, I mentioned this a lot. What could be healthier reframes? It's okay for me to be imperfect. It's okay for me to be learning and in a state of like, I always think of the metaphors I always use. Like, I don't know if anybody has raised chickens. I've raised chickens in the past, and they start out so cute as little chicks. They're like the cute animal on the planet, just about. And then as adults, they're very beautiful sometimes. They're still cute, but they're also really pretty. They have just beautiful feathers. But if you've ever seen like a teenage chick, a chicken in the intermediate stage, man, they're ugly and awkward, and they have all kinds of strange proportions and stuff like that. And so it's okay for us to be seen in this state of of awkwardness, like teenage coming of age development and stuff like that. You know, just like human teenagers, they're smelly sometimes and weird acting and weird looking, but that's okay. It's like it's a beautiful part of the process for us to grow through this and learn. Okay. That's obviously a very important point for me. Yeah. Okay. And last here, what am I believing about myself when I don't do these things? Is this actually true? Is it? Yeah, absolutely. Is when I shame myself, I'm too much, I'm not enough, I'm a burden, I'm a bad person, and look, everybody sees my bad intentions all the time, and I'm too selfish, and I'm too self-centered, and I'm too sometimes when we have like wounds around this stuff and we've been told that we're a burden and that we're sort of taking advantage, it kind of gets into that I am bad wound. We even there's so many people I see all the time ask themselves like, am I a narcissist? And am I really secretly selfishly exploiting everybody around me in my life? It's like if you're asking those questions, there's probably a little bit of insecurity that is coming out in your behaviors, but you're definitely not just this exploitation machine of manipulation and just chewing people up and spitting them out. That's not happening. It's like yeah, what am I'm having trouble saying this. What am I believing about myself? That's a funny sentence. When I don't do this, is this actually true? And the answer is usually no, not at all. I have good intentions. I'm doing things from my needs. I'm doing things from the place of the coping behaviors that are available to me, even though I could learn better behaviors. It's okay for me to be where I am. And is it true that I'm a burden? Is it true that I'm too much? Is it true that I'm not enough, or that I'm a bad person, and that in this relationship that I've been dating this person for 3 months, 6 months? Is it true that all my intentions are bad and exploitative and things? And it's usually no, not at all. So we deserve to question all that stuff. And I guess that's all I have to say with that slide. So we can move to questions.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is the end. So
We
let's
don't have much
see.
time. I know we have a
Yeah,
hard
I was gonna say
today,
I
so.
do have a hard stop at like 4 minutes because I have to have a take my partner to the train station
Yeah.
earlier than planned. So
Do we want to do a
um
quick one? and
Yeah,
just
let's do like a quick one. I feel like yeah, if you I can actually grab right. Actually, let's see. So we answered a bunch in the chat too. So let me see. Okay, so I'm trying to some of these we answered. So okay, I'm actually gonna go to Kiara's question. I think the other ones I know I for sure answered some of them. So, okay. So I'll go to Kara's question. So, how can I meet the need for that connection of belonging and feeling at home? This is difficult, and it's something I've always searched for since I was a child. I found it for the first time with my FAX. I can't feel it even with my best friends. It's like searching for your other soul, for someone you lost a long time ago, but feel and know it's somewhere out there. Okay, so this is really beautifully phrased. Um, so I would say, yeah, I almost wonder if okay, so let me start here. There's like a few pieces. So I'll kind of give an overview, but um in order to feel a sense of belonging and feeling at home, honestly, like a prerequisite to that is to be seen for our authentic selves. Okay. I feel like I don't know, I'm so curious what Ben, what you have to say. I kind of feel like that's like possibly the crux of like when we feel like we don't belong. Sometimes there's a core wound there, so you can for sure look at reprogramming the I don't belong core wounds. So that is a core wound, or like something's wrong with me. Even you can sort of check that out. You can do the auto suggestion where you find every day you find pieces of evidence for how you do belong, how where you can feel at home. And I'm curious when you say at home, what that means for you. Is it like feeling safe, feeling accepted for who you are, maybe? Like you can tune into how you define that. Um, and once you do that, you can do some of the reprogramming, find where you do have belonging, where you do have safety, acceptance, those types of things. Then also check in with where do you potentially block that from getting met, right? Because like we talked about earlier, sometimes we can put holes in our buckets. Like for example, I'll give you just like a quick example of safety. Sometimes people have a really high need for safety and security. Meanwhile, they're like constantly looking at all the ways everything can go wrong and catastrophizing. And it's like that's a great way to take away your sense of safety, right? It's like poking holes in that bucket. So I'm curious if there are any ways that you can identify that like poke holes in your bucket for belonging. Maybe you don't express or show yourself authentically or vulnerably, or like we talked today, sometimes with expectations, right? We might have these silent expectations of people, but we're not actually sharing our needs. And so I'm curious if like that resonates at all for you. And then you can work on showing yourself more authentically, communicating a little more vulnerably. And I would so there's those two pieces, reprogram the wound, look at where you're poking holes in your bucket. And thirdly, I would look at when you do feel this way. You said you found it for the first time with your FAX. So it sounds like that's maybe the only time. What was it specifically that gave you that sense of belonging? Like, what did this person do or say or how did they behave? Like, what were the specific patterns or things around feeling that way? And then try to like replicate those things in the relationship to yourself. Okay. Like, so kind of like how we said earlier in the chat, some people were asking like how to get my need for feeling desired or wanted. What does that look like from someone else? And then like can we give that to ourselves, right? So maybe it's your FAX always like was really present with you. How can you be more present with yourself, right? Maybe they just accepted you for who you were, and they just like all of your quirks. Maybe scan for like where you don't accept yourself or where you judge yourself, and try to sort of to work on those things. Yeah. Okay. So you said in the chat, feeling at home is like being loved, cared for, seen, heard, cherished. Yeah. So look at like, what do those things look like and how can you work? I mean, this is great. You really dissected it like nicely. So can you work on each of these things and filling those buckets for yourself? I think those are going to be like three good places to start. And I'll hand it to Ben. Ben, I'll still be here. I'm just gonna go off camera, so I
okay.
can move my laptop. But I'll
Okay.
I'll still be here, and I'm so curious to hear kind of like what your
Yeah,
thoughts are.
I think that
Go.
was so complete, and I don't have much to add. I'm just gonna like re-emphasize that one part where I worked with a lot of people who have this kind of issue, and it's especially like, they're avoidant or they have that avoidant side, or they're even anxious. And all of us kind of have that possibility of not being really in tune with ourselves, and that sense of belonging and feeling cherished, loved, cared for, seen, heard, understood, all of that stuff, really valued, feeling precious, and like we are so valuable, like we're one of a kind, one in a million, all of that stuff. Everybody that I've worked with, we don't typically, when we have an empty, like a lack of feeling that way, and we also, many of us, like, ascribe that to an old ex-partner or something, and sometimes it's fresh off a breakup, or sometimes it's somebody from decades past, where it's like, oh my gosh, nobody has ever treated me and seen me and desired me in the way that they did. That all says there's something missing in the way that we relate to ourselves. And I want to say, I don't want to like rehash everything Annette said. I would just go back and like listen to that or take notes. What she said is perfect. The only thing that I would add to get more targeted is, especially coming from that avoidant place, target your emotions, the feelings themselves. Sit down day to day and spend time saying, like, wow, throughout the day, or what I'm feeling right now is fear or anger or sadness or joy or curiosity or excitement or anything, all of it, and really being there as somebody who hears that emotional feedback and attunes to it and validates it and says, I see why you feel that way, and who feels into it. It's like that is as a recovering, a healing, avoidant person, I think that is like the ground zero. That is like the bread and butter. That is the deepest um, extent of validate self-validation and I guess regrowing or reparenting all those places where we feel like I'm unseen, I'm unheard, I'm misunderstood. When you do this as a regular practice, all of those things kind of melt away, because you're meeting those needs in the most fundamental way that we've always needed throughout our lives. When we were born, we needed somebody to interpret and to see and understand, and all of our feelings, all of our emotions. Those are our signals, right? They're external signals, and then they're also internal signals as we grow up. So our parents do that for us, or our caregivers, and then as we grow, we learn to do that for ourselves, but we have insecure attachment, and so we didn't quite learn that. I think that is like the ground zero, the most necessary thing um, uh, ever for all of us, and it leads to the fulfillment of all of those other facets that you mentioned. So yeah, I hope that's helpful for everybody. And that's all I have to say. So we will hand
Awesome.
it over to Renee, and
Yeah,
thank
thanks,
you so much. It's
Ben. Thank you guys.
been a pleasure.